The Edmonton Oilers fell 5-3 to the Minnesota Wild, and we are going to break it all down on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So on today's show, we're going to unpack the 5-3 loss to the Minnesota Wild because I think it was particularly instructive, and there are some extra factors in this game that we'll address because shorthanded, even more so than expected. You had a late scratch. You had a question about Hyman's availability. He ultimately didn't play tonight either. So we'll talk about that as far as being shorthanded. But one thing before we do start, I have a smidge of a cold. So if you hear my voice a little more nasally than usual or sniffles, I apologize. All right. First segment, going to address why the Wild were able to get to their game tonight and what they were able to do to make the Oilers so uncomfortable. In our second segment, we're going to tackle just why Minnesota is so good right now. And then in our final segment, we're going to talk a little bit about the Oilers in the macro, in the big picture, heading into the weekend where they're going to take on the Rangers Saturday night. So, big picture. I was half looking at the Oiler game. I was looking at Thursday Night Football. And then when I looked back over, the Oiler goal horn had gone off and Marc-Andre Fleury was looking very confused. And they cut to Leon Draisaitl, who was mouthing what happened. And that was exactly what the Oilers needed to get going in this game. So badly this season, the Oilers have not been able to buy a bounce. They cannot get a puck to go in when they don't deserve one to go in. And frankly, when that first shot goes in, that 125-footer bounces in, you as an Oiler fan are sitting here saying, okay, we got a shot tonight. And look, I understand the recent history against Minnesota. Minnesota kicks our butts quite often, but you got something to go your way for once in a season where it's seemingly that everything can go wrong. You know, I've been calling this the Murphy's Law type season where one bounce goes wrong, and all of a sudden you're down 3-0. Tonight, you got the bounce. You got the freebie. Marc-Andre Fleury gave you a freebie tonight. I don't want to say he hot dogged it, but he misjudged the bounce and he gave you a freebie. There are not a lot of nights in the National Hockey League where the other team is going to spot you a goal. And tonight, you really needed it. Because as we said at the outset, you already had no Arvidsson. He got LTIR'd retroactively. You had no Hyman tonight, who got injured the other night against Ottawa. And you had to bring in Drake Caggiula, and you played Kasperi Kapanen, who was a waiver claim Tuesday. And, on Wednesday, Kapanen was claimed off of waivers. And you had to slide two guys who are not regular NHLers. And look, I understand Kapanen's played a lot on the Blues. Playing on the fourth line on the Blues is very different than being on the top six of the Oilers. Caggiula is a fringe NHLer. Played one game earlier this year. Last in the NHL 2 years ago. You also had to deal with the fact Travis Dermott was a late scratch. He was sick during the day, didn't end up playing. So Josh Brown, who had been sent down to Bakersfield, had to come back up and draw in. And when you are as shorthanded as the Oilers were tonight, you know, you're down multiple forwards, you're down multiple defensemen, no Nurse again. It really does feel like that anything that breaks wrong is going to be cataclysmic because you just don't have the margin for error. You know, in a normal game, and I know I've been very hard on the Oilers this season as far as consistency, as far as living up to expectations, but even when they're struggling the way they are in the aggregate, in the big picture, they still have margin, more room for error. You know, a game like tonight where you have three guys in your forward group who you can kind of depend on and Draisaitl, McDavid, and Nugent-Hopkins, and then 2 defensemen, and Ekholm and Bouchard. That's a lot of hockey game with guys you don't really feel great about. I know Corey Perry had a goal tonight. He moonlighted on the first power play unit in the Hyman spot, which weird to see 39-year-old Corey Perry in the Hyman spot. But this is, I don't want to say it's humbling because I feel like the loss to Montreal was a lot worse because Montreal is not a good team. Minnesota's a good hockey team, man. They are very structured. They are very disciplined. They force you to work hard for your offense. And we'll talk more about the Minnesota side of this picture in the second segment. But coming away from this game, and I read a few people who were talking about this on Blue Sky and on Twitter for that matter, the Oilers just look very disjointed. And there's multiple levels to that. We've talked ad nauseum this season about the Oilers' struggles in transition when they can't get clean breakouts, when they have to organize, regroup, and wait for a forward to skate the puck. As we always say here on Locked On Oilers, there's 2 ways to get the puck where you want it. You can skate it there or you can pass it there. Too often this season, the Oilers have been passing the puck to nobody. They've been rimming the puck out off the glass, and they've been alley-ooping it 50 feet in the air just to clear the zone to buy some breathing room. Against a structured team like Minnesota, that is going to get you worn down. The Minnesota goal that broke open this game, the Marcus Johansson goal, that's exactly what happened. Troy Stecher had 2 separate chances to clear that puck out, and both times he flubbed it. And look, I understand Troy Stecher is playing more hockey and more meaningful, competitive hockey in terms of both the team he's on and the quality of competition he's getting than basically any year since 2020. This is the most serious high level hockey and minutes and quality of competition he's gotten in a long time. And I do genuinely kind of feel bad for him, for Dermott, for Emberson, for these guys who are being shoehorned into roles they might not necessarily be qualified for. But that goal broke this open because at 3-2, you're sitting there thinking, well, we're probably not scoring 2 more in regulation. We might be able to tie this game at 3, but then we either need overtime or the shootout to win this game because Minnesota's really good defensively. And look, Marc-Andre Fleury spotted the Oilers 2 goals tonight. The third goal, the Skinner goal, that comes in garbage time. I don't really want to get too, I don't think there's anything you can really take away from that. They had sustained offensive zone time for 4.5 minutes straight. They eventually got one past Fleury. The first 2 goals, the first one Draisaitl gets is a freebie. Fleury just missed it. He outright missed it. It happens. You get that goal from the neutral zone 2 or 3 times a season across the league. The Oilers got one. And then the Perry goal, Fleury was off balance. It's a swoop play off a face-off. The puck goes behind the net. Perry gets the loose puck and wraps it around. And it ricochets off of a Minnesota defender. But Fleury doesn't really get over that well on the play. And look, I understand Marc-Andre Fleury's 39 years old. I don't necessarily think he's going to go post to post like Shesterkin would there, but the Oilers got 2 freebies in this game, and they didn't score a third goal until the game was over. And that speaks volume about the quality of offense you were able to generate. The Oilers got a lot of one and dones. The Oilers got a lot of zone time and didn't do anything with it. And it gets back to what we were talking about earlier in the week, the idea of working for your offense, putting pressure on the other team, forcing them to actively play defense until they make a mistake. And that's what the Wild did in this game. And it's what ultimately broke the Oilers down. Once you get past that Ekholm-Bouchard pair tonight against Emberson, Josh Brown, Brett Kulak, I mean, you're going to wear those guys down. Brett Kulak and Troy Stecher, those guys are going to break down, and not physically in terms of injuries, but you make those guys who are not, and look, Kulak's been good this year. I don't want to necessarily rag on him all that much, but he's playing a lot of minutes. He's playing more minutes probably than he expected to. And I understand that's mostly because Nurse is hurt right now, but it really feels like the threads are beginning to fray on this team. They need to get healthy. They've played a lot of games in a short period of time. They have a lot of travel. They've definitely been around, the swing through Nashville, Eastern Canada. They got some work to do now. They need to get healthy. They got the Rangers on Saturday night. That's another measuring stick game. And speaking of measuring sticks, We are going to talk about the Minnesota Wild perspective of this coming up in our next segment, so be sure to stick around. If you've learned anything about me in my time as host of Locked On Oilers, you know I love getting out there, going to events, whether it's concerts or games. I love that feeling of walking up the steps out into the grandstand and that flash of light that hits you. And next Wednesday, I'm avoiding seeing people I went to high school with on the night before American Thanksgiving. My friends and I are going to Devil's Blues. We got our tickets through Gametime, the only app I use to buy tickets to go to games. And with Gametime, you have the opportunity at an exclusive zone deal for the NHL Winter Classic at Wrigley Field. Go to the Gametime app to purchase tickets and get 10% off bleacher seats and 20 to 25% off home plate area seats. My favorite thing about Gametime is the seat view feature, where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know what you're getting into before you press that button. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we make our way into the weekend. And this was a measuring stick game. And I think, frankly, this could be a real reality check, because I know in a long season, you don't want to make any one game out to be that important. Of course, there are some games, you get your divisional opponents, the 4-point swing. Conference opponents becomes relevant as far as wild card and tiebreakers. Right now, the Oilers are very much in that wild card mix, not terribly far out of one of the divisional spots in the Pacific, but this is the type of game you hope that wakes your team up. And the Oilers have some excuse. You're missing a second pair defenseman. You're missing 2 top 6 wingers. You had to bring in AHLers to fill out your lineup tonight. You're playing a good team in Minnesota who's got the second best record in the entire league, that's littered with star power. Kaprizov, Boldy, Faber, Eriksson Ek is a really high quality player. Marco Rossi is a quality player. The Wild really did a nice job tonight. And similarly to what we said about Montreal after the game on Monday, you make Edmonton work for their offense, they start to get frustrated. When you force Edmonton to string together 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 passes just to get one good scoring chance, they start to get frustrated. And this is where you can pick apart rush teams if you are a disciplined and well-structured defense. And Minnesota had, and we talked about this with Seth Topol yesterday on the crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Wild. The Wild, when they've been at their best in the last 10 to 15 years, it has been through their defense. When you think about those teams with Jared Spurgeon and Ryan Suter and Matt Dumba, and now you've still got some nice DNA from that old iteration where you've got Brodin, who's pretty underrated as far as defensive defensemen go. You've got Brock Faber, who's the next American guy up in that lineage of Fox, of McAvoy, of Quinn Hughes. I don't know if necessarily he's going to be that good. He could very easily be American Evan Bouchard. He could be American Noah Dobson. He can easily be a 55, 60-point defenseman with strong underlying numbers. And they did it with their backup in that Marc-Andre Fleury, who hadn't played in a few weeks. I was told by one of my Wild fan friends when I tweeted, has Fleury been this bad all season? Because he looked awful on the first 2 Oiler goals. And after that, he started to play better, so I might have jinxed it. But this is a telltale game for the second time in the span of a week. And look, I understand they scored some goals tonight. They didn't get shut out like on Monday against Montreal, and they're missing multiple forwards since the game against Montreal. But it's very telling that the 2 teams that have had success against the Oilers this week were the teams that were willing to just cycle, force the Oilers to play defense, and then start picking them apart as the Oilers got desperate. I'll make the metaphor again. There's a desert island desperate, and there's drowning desperate. When you're drowning desperate, which is kind of what the Oilers are when they're down in these games, You're flailing. You don't know how much longer you can hold out. You don't know how tired you are. You don't know what's in the water around you. You don't know if anybody's going to be able to see you out in the open ocean. And very quickly, that fear, that dread starts to set in of, oh no, what I'm going to do. On a desert island, you can walk around. There might be other people. There might be animals, yes. You have a better chance of signaling from above, signaling to above from the ground on land than you do from water, because you can stand on your own 2 feet, you can flail, you can move things, you can make tools. You have a better opportunity at surviving on an island than you do out on the open water, purely because you have ground under you. And look, the Wild showed you a good example of that tonight. You give up a goal 27 seconds into the game because your goalie has a brain fart. It's very easy to start flailing around and feeling weird about it. But the Wild were very composed. They were really good about this game. And it's weird to say, but you think about it from this perspective. And I haven't even mentioned the Drake Caggiula Matt Boldy fight because of the hit on Kaprizov. But it's mystifying to me how the Oilers keep ending up in these situations where they have chances to just make plays. And like, I'm looking at the goal animation right now of the Matt Boldy goal. You've got your big dogs out there. You've got McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard, and Ekholm out there. They have 3 separate chances to intercept loose pucks or force turnovers. They lose it all 3 times, and Boldy just walks it down Main Street. Bouchard doesn't go out. Podkolzin doesn't go out. He's leaking towards the neutral zone, trying to cheat a little bit for offense to maybe be there for a dump in, and instead, the Oilers concede a goal. And as far as the Caggiula hit, I think that definitely gave the Wild a bit of juice, and that's the peril of that type of play. I talk about this often, why I don't think fighting matters all of that much in terms of the narrative, in terms of if it helps winning or losing, because you don't know the effect it's going to have until afterwards, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have the desired effect. And I don't think Caggiula was trying to injure Kaprizov. I don't think he was trying to fire the team up. I think he saw a player who, I can hit this guy. He's close enough to me. He leans a little bit much. He maybe sticks his arm out a smidge. I would have been fine if they called that a penalty for, interference or what have you, because the puck was moved by the time he threw the hit. But I understand why there wasn't a penalty called on the ice. Of course, I understand from a Wild perspective that if you hit our best player, you're going to have to answer for that. And I'm very glad Kaprizov wasn't hurt. He was able to come back into the game after limping off. It was definitely a scary moment there. And I understand why Matt Boldy felt the need to go and fight. And I agree. I talk about this with one of my friends all the time. My friend Gabby, she always says to me, I don't understand why people complain about the fight after a clean hit. The whole point of fighting is to police the game. If the players feel that a hit, even if it's not a penalty, is dangerous or dirty, and that rises to the threshold where we need a fight to police that hit, that's fighting having its desired effect. If you don't want that fight, you need to ask Matt Boldy why he felt the need to fight, and then you need to ask yourself, well, if he felt the need to fight and that's good enough for him, and we still have fighting in hockey, and this is in response to something as a means of policing a behavior, what's the argument here? And I understand that hockey used to be different. I do. And culturally, the role of fighting in hockey has changed. And I do understand that there are people who are sensitive to that. And that's okay. You can lament the change of a sport over time, but it doesn't necessarily mean one way is better or more right or more moral. But I do think that hit and that subsequent fight had unintended consequences of firing the Wild up and giving them a little bit of a PO streak of, you tried to injure our best player. Okay, we're going to beat you into a pulp this game. And there were a few scrums after whistles. There was definitely a little more of that after that hit. And ultimately the Oilers end up losing. They get out physicaled. They get outplayed. Really, really difficult loss. We're going to take our final break of today's show. We're going to come back and we're going to address the Oilers' depth issues, if this team is starting to fray, or if this is just really bad luck and injuries all at the same time, coming up right after this. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. If you opened the FanDuel app or went over to the website, 2 really good games this weekend. We've got the 49ers heading up to Lambeau Field. Great jersey matchup, and there's supposed to be snow on the ground. 49ers, 3-point road underdogs. And then game of the week, Monday Night Football, Ravens at the Chargers, where the Ravens are 3-point road favorites. I cannot wait for Monday. Head on over to FanDuel.com where you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we navigate our way through what's been a tumultuous week. You get shut out by Montreal. You come back and storm it out of the gate against Ottawa. You look really good doing it. You lose Hyman at the end of the Ottawa game. You retroactively put Arvidsson on long-term injured reserve. You have to deal with Dermott being sick. Nurse starting to work his way back. He skated on Thursday morning, not in a full contact jersey, but still probably another few days away. He might try to push to play on Saturday, but ultimately, I would say the Oilers should err on the side of caution because they need to avoid playing Josh Brown if they can help it. Josh Brown is not an NHL defenseman on a good team. He's not. He is an NHL fringe player. He can play in a pinch, but if you are playing him consecutive games, you're not a serious team. And injuries happen. You need depth. I understand that Josh Brown is your 8th organizational defenseman once you go down the depth chart. And that's okay. Not a lot of teams are going to have an 8th quality defenseman available unless it's a prospect, someone who's unproven, who kind of pops off just kind of because they're ready. If there's a lack of familiarity with them that allows them to thrive, what have you. But for the most part, once you get past that 7th defenseman, most teams are going to struggle to find someone competent to play reasonably well. At that point, you're just hoping they don't actively harm the team. Other than that, I do think the Oilers' depth is starting to show signs of weakness because the argument for this team was that it was the deepest forward group on paper in the McDavid-Draisaitl era. You lose Evander Kane, who may or may not come back this season from last year. He gave you 20 goals. You lose Warren Fogle. You lose Dylan Holloway, and you lose Ryan McLeod. McLeod, not a 30-goal guy, but Evander Kane can give you 30 goals, 25 goals if he's healthy. I think Dylan Holloway, if he was healthy and on this team, could conceivably push for 15 or 20 goals. I don't think that's entirely out of the question. I think McLeod could give you 10 to 15 goals. Right now, if you go and you open up Hockey Reference or whatever sports statistics website you like to use, and you start sorting in the categories by various statistics, Draisaitl has 14 goals, McDavid has 9. After that, the next 2 players are defensemen in Evan Bouchard and Brett Kulak with 5 and 4. Zach Hyman, Jeff Skinner, Connor Brown, and Corey Perry all have 3 goals each. That is not good enough. If you could sort by points, McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard, Ekholm, and Darnell Nurse are 1 through 5. When you start to sort through the lineup, it starts to get scary. I understand that the Oilers are desperate. They've been loading up McDavid and Draisaitl at evens on top of the power play work they typically get as a means of trying to cope with the difficultness of the situation. But right now, what was supposed to be the strength of this team, the forward group depth, is not there. It fundamentally is not there. And Jeff Skinner, it continues to see declining ice time. I think that's definitely a cause for concern. the simple fact that that Jeff Skinner is not playing a lot of minutes at 13.43 per game in all situations. That's absolutely not enough for somebody who was expected to do a lot this season. When you look, Draisaitl leading the team in time on ice, that makes sense. Hyman's up there, McDavid's up there. And then you start getting to the middle six and the bottom six. You talk about Henrique's at 14.30 a game. He's only got 4 points on the season. Connor Brown has 5 points on the season. Janmark has 8. I mean, that line was really good in the playoffs, but a part of you has to wonder right now if the Oilers ate the cheese on a group peaking at the exact right time and kind of got okey doked. And then as far as Skinner and Arvidsson, who have yet to really get going as members of the Oilers, I felt that Arvidsson's game would translate probably a little bit smoother because he doesn't necessarily need the puck to be particularly effective. Skinner, on the other hand, if he's not skating in a straight line with the puck to create zone entries, or he's not stationary to fire shots, he's not particularly useful. He's not going to set guys up. He's not going to back check. He's not going to forecheck. He's not going to play defense. Right now, there are serious depth questions about this forward group, and there are real. I don't want to sound dramatic because this is one loss. They're still very much in the mix. It is only November. But the way this team was constructed, they're not playing like it. The Oilers are, as we sit here right now on November 22nd, now that the game's over and it's bled on over into Friday morning, at least here in the Eastern time zone, the Oilers are, I don't want to say they have the check engine light on, but that's kind of the best metaphor I can come up with right now. The team is supposed to dominate the McDavid Draisaitl minutes. The third line is supposed to be opportunistic and be able to pounce the way they were in the playoffs, the way Connor Brown and Janmark were. The fourth line is supposed to slow the game down to a halt. The fourth line is fine. I cannot actively complain about the fourth line when the other parts of the lineup are not working as designed. I think the Oilers overestimated their forwards' ability to cover for their defense because we know the defense is the bigger issue and definitely needs addressing sooner rather than later. And Bob Stauffer alluded to this the other night, that the Oilers are definitely looking for a defenseman, probably a right-handed defenseman, and gave the tidbit that it's not somebody you might expect would be available or most obvious name. So I got to do some research at some point and start to try and read the tea leaves. But right now, the Oilers aren't playing the way they're supposed to, and their game, when it's not working, it's ugly. You know, it was disjointed tonight. It was a lot of perimeter shots, a lot of passes to nobody, forcing passes that got intercepted or forcing shots that got blocked. And it's really difficult for the Oilers right now, and they're missing guys, and that's valid for a little while at least. But even when Arvidsson was playing, even when Hyman was playing, when Nurse was playing, none of those guys was lighting the world on fire. There's work to be done here. The Rangers lost to Calgary on Thursday night. They didn't play well at all. The Flames dominated them on possession. The Rangers lucked into 2 goals. The 2 goals they got came in a very short 2.5-minute window, and the Flames ended up putting them away. And the Rangers are a pretty poor defensive team. So I'll be very curious to see how the Oilers decide to handle that. Whether or not Hyman can go is a question mark as well. But I think that'll do it for this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. So before everybody gets out of here and goes and has a safe and fun weekend, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you listen on Apple or Spotify, please throw the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell. Thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, head on over to Locked On Daily Fantasy Hockey to dominate your fantasy leagues with tips from Steal and Flip, available wherever you get your podcasts. I will talk to you guys on Monday. Everyone have a fun and safe weekend. Let's go Oilers.